Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining. Thank you to the Vashon Center for the Arts for the opportunity to share some of what we're up to in Washington and beyond. I say caution at the bottom. I just want to warn folks that this is a science talk, and I will hopefully try to keep it as engaging as I can. But we'll just jump right in. I'm going to preface this by just putting out there so that we're clear from the start that nobody knows how many mountain lions or cougars or whatever you call them live among us. No state knows how many are within their state boundaries. Some states are much better at estimating or guessing how many are in their state's boundaries than others, but nobody knows for sure. And it's this uncertainty that fuels the ongoing debate, which is vicious and mean, about how many mountain lions live among us. And it's really the heart or the root of a bigger sort of debate over whether we need to control them, whether there are too many or whether there are too few and that they need greater protection. And it's media headlines like this one that draw a lot of attention. Cougars see massive population increase. Encounters between humans, mountain lions are on the rise, and experts tell us why. Are mountain lion attacks on the rise? And occasionally you see some folks trying to work to dispel the sort of misinformation or at least stem some of the hysteria around these headlines. This one, for instance, increased cougar sightings don't necessarily mean increases in big cat populations, which is totally true. But regardless of those sorts of headlines, the inevitable follow-up is this. Whenever people start to worry that mountain lion populations are growing, the immediate response is pressure on state agencies to control them. Here in recent years, Idaho approves a major expansion in mountain lion hunting. Colorado approves a major expansion in mountain lion hunting. Utah approves an increase in cougar hunting, and so does Washington. Washington in particular has been a tinderbox for cougar management for a long time. There's been an increase in negative interactions between cats and mountain lions, and for that reason, people have speculated that there must be more of them. And so there's been a lot of debate about what to do about that. But it's so much worse when a tragedy occurs. And one of those rare instances when there's a negative interaction between mountain lions and people. And it happened here in Washington in May of 2018. A mountain lion attacked and killed a biker east of Seattle in the mountains. And that was like a match thrown on a tinderbox. Since that time, there have been radical changes in the state of Washington. It renewed the debates about how many there are, whether there were too many, whether there were too few. What did we need to do about mountain lions so that we could coexist with them? So when you add fear to an already controversial subject for which we really have no idea of the answer, we don't really know how many are out there. We can only do our best to estimate how many are out there. And I'll get to that. Washington has done a really great job of doing so. But this is what's happened since May of 2018. Washington has approved a much larger mountain lion hunt, even against the recommendations of their own mountain lion biologists. Some sheriffs have actually found a loophole in regulation and law that has allowed them to start to control cougars within their own jurisdictions. They're deputizing houndsmen to go out and preemptively kill mountain lions. Folks, of course, are pushing back a bit. There's the wildlife advocates have risen to try to defend mountain lions and to say that, this is not going to help things. And Washington, which is a state that has not allowed hound hunting for many, many years, has now passed legislation and now rules within the Wildlife Commission to allow a non-lethal pursuit season in which select houndsmen will be able to train their dogs. And this is all so that they are ready to help the state agency, public safety officials, etc., to deal with mountain lions when something terrible happens, like it did in May of 2018. I started this way because I want you to know that counting matters. The root issue in all of these fights, in the contentious issues around mountain lions across the West, is really, how many are there? How many are out there? Are there too few or too many? And with that in mind, I just want to take one moment and take a breath. I don't want to continue down the road of contentious debate. I'd like to take this time to reintroduce the mountain lion to you. What do we know about them? They're a large carnivore. They're the 4th largest cat species in the world. They're the largest cat that can purr. They are mostly solitary, but they interact with their neighbors with frequency and some predictability. They're playful. They're just like big house cats. They form really amazing and intimate familial bonds with their kittens, and their kittens stay with their mothers for 18 months on average, and sometimes longer, up to 2 years. But those bonds are intense, and they're real, and they're affectionate. Mountain lions have the largest range of any terrestrial mammal in the Americas. And because of that, they are the world record holder for most common names. Because they stretch across such a vast area and across so many human cultures, certainly historically as well as presently, there were just lots and lots of names for them. In 1960, someone compiled 84 different common names for the species, and no doubt there were more. But when you hear cougar, mountain lion, Florida panther, Puma, catamount, these are all the same animal. Having just moved to Washington recently from Wyoming, I say mountain lion because that's typically what we called them there. But locally, they are most often referred to as cougars. What I would like to emphasize about mountain lions is that they are an interconnected species. They may be the most interconnected carnivore in the world. Certainly in terms of what we know about them, that may be true. I just finished a review with several biologists from Defenders of Wildlife in which we looked at just all the interactions between other species and plants and mountain lions. And we found 484 different invertebrates, mammals, and flora that there had been research documenting directly impacted by or interacting with mountain lions. And that's just the scientific literature. They're a species predominantly, all these interactions are predominantly invertebrates, or tons of them. Mammals, of course, many of them are because they eat them, but animals that influence mountain lions as well. Some plants, some birds. And I would just say that this number, even though huge, is no doubt the tip of the iceberg because we just don't study this much. And there's hardly been any research at all about mountain lions in the tropics, which are some of the most biodiverse regions of the world. And so even if we just had a single study from the tropics looking at biotic interactions around mountain lions, that number would no doubt double or triple. What do mountain lion populations look like? This is important as we talk about counting them. So a mountain lion population is composed of resident males, so these adult males that hold a territory, resident females that are also overlaid in the same area, some of which will have kittens, some of which won't. And then the class that most folks don't talk about much are these subadult animals, which we sometimes call transients. And these are animals that have left mom, They're on their own, they're independent mountain lions, but they haven't found a territory to call their own. So they wander the landscape. And so they kind of pass through areas, they may linger for a while, and then they may move on again. And those are the hardest to count because they're constantly moving. And I just kind of assessed about 15 projects that kind of reported the percentage of each of these classes to kind of give you a sense of what a typical mountain lion population might look like. And you can think of these percents of out of 100. So if you had 100 mountain lions from an area, you would expect 14 of them to be adult males. And you expect about 31 of them, so more than twice the number, to be adult females. And an even larger number, 38 of them, would be kittens of some age. They might be 2 months old, they might be 14 months old, but they're with mom. And then 17 out of 100, which is a larger number than the resident males, are transients, meaning they're animals that are cruising around, that don't have a territory. They may hang out in a valley for a week or a month, and then they're gone and they never come back again. And so it's just interesting to think about these mountain lions that are out there in which you might encounter. Mountain lion populations are not sort of uniform gray masses, not at all. They're really a mosaic of smaller communities that, for the most part, function independently. And by function, I'm really talking about interactions. So you get these resident males that really define the spatial sort of areas in which a community sits, and they act like governors, and they rule an area in which there are resident females, and they interact with each other quite frequently. They know each other, they meet each other, they share food with each other, they walk the same paths, they play in the same areas, they hunt in the same areas, and so they interact frequently and then less frequently across communities. So, they might have interactions with a female in the next community over, but that's much less often than the females that are existing in that territory. And within that community, you've got your residents, but then you also have transients. They might be passing through, as I said, for a week, for a month, for 3 months. Some get stuck, especially like in the Rockies where I've worked. You'll get these youngsters, they move in just as winter's starting. The snow gets so deep that they just are trapped for the entire winter, and then they start moving again come spring. And last, I think it's hard to talk about mountain lions without mentioning that they are carnivores, that they can kill prey 8 times as big as themselves. So that's a big animal that they can take down and successfully wrestle, kill, and then of course consume. How do we count mountain lions? They're hard to find. They're hard to see, especially up here in this part of the world where we are surrounded in thick, dense forests. How do you even find one, let alone count how many are existing on a landscape? And the traditional approach, meaning the one that we've used for decades and sort of the original way to do this, was really based on catching them. You would go out on a landscape and you would catch as many as you could. I mean, and your goal is, of course, to catch them all, but that may be unrealistic. And you catch as many as you can, and then you fit them with some type of collar. Today, it's a GPS collar, like the one in the corner there. I can use my little arrow. And you overlap them in space. You know exactly where they live, and you can literally overlap all the mountain lions that live there, and so that you can come up with a number of mountain lions per unit space. And that's the traditional approach that people have used to count or come up with a density, if you will, of mountain lions. And in fact, that is the very method that the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has used to estimate the number of mountain lions in the entire state of Washington. So let's think about how they did that. This paper, which is a research paper, just came out in the last month. So this is really new. It doesn't really change what we already knew about Washington, but it really supports what has been continually said about what is happening in Washington. I just want to take a moment to recognize some of the names that are on this paper, because these are the heroes of Washington. Washington has some fantastic mountain lion biologists, and let's just take a moment to recognize some of them. Rich Beausoleil is the guy who's at the top there, and he's leading this paper. He's the cougar specialist for the entire state of Washington. Drop down a little bit. Brian Kurtzen has been studying mountain lions for, years and years in Washington, and has been one of the sort of leading field biologists for the species for the state of Washington. Below him is Ben Miletsky, and he, again, is just one of these folks who's been involved for so long, so many years, studying mountain lions in the state of Washington. He now runs the Gray Wolf program, but originally started in mountain lions. And below that, Gary Coiler, who is retired, but spent decades contributing to what we know about mountain lions, not just in Washington, but as a species in general. What did they do? How have they come up with an estimate of the number of mountain lions in the state of Washington? This is what they did. They chose 5 areas. These are them in these little sort of outlined in black. You've got Columbia down here. You've got these 5 distinct study areas. Got my little arrow, if you saw it, circling each one. And in each one of those, they went in and caught as many animals as they could. And, again, the goal being every mountain lion. That may be unrealistic, as I said, but that's the goal. And so the original work that began in 2002 was in these 2 different study areas, and they, for 5 years, caught as many cats as they could in each of them. So, for instance, up here, in the Stevens, in this corner, they caught 57 animals over 5 years. Down here, they caught 46 animals over 5 years. Shortly after they began those 2 projects, they started this one, the longest, most intensive project they ran, 11 years long, 75 different mountain lions caught and monitored over that time. Then they added this study for 6 years, 33 animals, 5 years, 37 animals, just east of Seattle. In each of those places, they marked mountain lions and overlapped their ranges, just like we talked about, to come up with a density of mountain lions in that area. So they did that for resident males and resident females. And importantly, they wanted to include the transients, those ones that are there sometimes and sometimes not. And so they included transients for the length of time that they lived in the study area, thus including them in the number of mountain lions, the estimate of the number of mountain lions that lived in any given place. So they did this for each study area, for each year of the study, and then they combined all of those things and averaged them to say, in general, there are this many mountain lions in a given place anywhere in Washington. So they took the average number of mountain lions per unit space determined from these 5 different places, and they extrapolated it and applied it to all, quote, cougar habitat in the state. And that is shown here in green. So they applied those numbers to all the green you can see on this map across the entire state of Washington. What did they learn? Well, based on that effort, so remember, we're talking about over 30 years of combined field effort, a huge number of staff hours, just indeterminable, years of staff life, countless people involved, staff biologists, hound handlers that are coming to help assist capture and to mark mountain lions, statisticians that they were engaged after the research was even conducted. They had to write the paper. There's so much that goes into one of these huge projects. The equipment, the gas in the trucks, the vehicles, the snowmobiles. I mean, we're not talking about $1 million investment here. This work represents millions of dollars to estimate the number of mountain lions in the state of Washington. They estimated, based on all that work, that there are between 1,900 and 2,200 independent mountain lions in the state of Washington. And by that, I mean resident males, resident females, and young transients who are wandering the landscape. They did not include kittens. Based on those percentages I showed you at the beginning, we can guess that there's probably another 720 mountain lions out there at any given time that are kittens, still with their mother, of different ages, 1 month, 7 months, 14 months. They applied it, just to be clear, to the cougar habitat. They estimated that to be 57% of the state of Washington. That's a huge amount of work. And even with that incredible effort, a defensible effort, I would hammer home, it's still open to criticism. What if they didn't catch every cat in those study areas? Then they would have had a lower abundance than they should have had. Did they count residents and transients? We already talked about that. They did include transients, but most people who use this method don't. Did the places where they work to study, those 5 areas, did they really reflect all of cougar habitat in the state? For instance, if we had chose 5 different study areas, would we have come up with different numbers of mountain lions? I don't know. Should there have been more study areas? Should we have spent more money? Should we have invested more time to make sure it was a better estimate or more applicable to the state of Washington? Other folks may have argued, did we really need to study cats for that long? Did we need to spend that much money to learn this estimate? And is that really important? There's a lot of things that pros and cons to this approach, but I would say that it's certainly defensible, and it represents a massive, massive investment by the state of Washington in trying to estimate how many mountain lions live within their state. Are there anything other approaches? Is there anything else that we could use instead? Because certainly that's a lot of work. It's a lot of money, but could we do this in another way? I'm going to try to synthesize this approach right here in as simple way as I can. The most common approach, other than catching and collaring or just counting. So if you have a species like pronghorn that lives out in the open, you can sit on a hill, use your telescope, and count them. You can do that over time, and you can see the population change, and that's a fantastic way. But when animals are cryptic, hard to see, a lot of folks rely on what's called capture, mark, recapture. And it's really quite a simple way to estimate the abundance of an unknown population. So here's an example I took from a fish class that shows, you've got a pond of fish. You have no idea how many fish are in there. So you take your net and you sweep it through a bunch and you catch a bunch of fish and you mark them in some way. In this way, they have pink outlines, and so that you can recognize them again. And then you drop them back into the pond. So they intermix. There's the marked fish and then the unmarked fish. And then you use your net again and you do a recapture, a second capture. And you look at the proportion of fish in that sample that were marked as pink. And based on the number of fish you caught the first time round, and then the proportion of fish in your second capture that were caught from the first time, you can use those to run some very simple math to estimate the total number of fish in your pond. Now, capture, mark, recapture has gone really in many, many different directions since this original sort of idea was proposed. And it's got a lot of complex math now that is really hard to follow for me and to understand exactly how they're applying all these different things, but it includes space and many, many things. But at its core, this is the assumption that based on a capture that you then can identify, you mix them back in a recapture, you can estimate the number of animals in a population. This has been a total game changer for animals that you can identify as individuals. And especially if we're talking about big cats, those with spots and stripes, because they're like fingerprints and they can identify individual animals just from a single photograph. They don't need to mark them in any way. They're already marked. And so you can use, again, a capture, which ones did you get photos of, and a recapture by putting your cameras out again and seeing which ones did you get again to do the mathematics of a capture, mark, recapture to estimate the abundance of those animals in a given place. It's amazing. Now, there's a way to do it if you can't identify individuals. And a lot of folks are now referring to genetic mark recapture. And so here on one side, this is some researchers who are taking tissue samples. They're using a crossbow. They shoot a dart at orca, and it just takes a little bit of tissue, and then they reel it back in. And from that tissue, they run genetic analyses that it basically creates a fingerprint of that individual orca. And so they can do that, again, run through, catch a bunch of orcas, identify them, run through again, and see what proportion in their second capture was caught the first time. They do this with mountain lions as well. And with mountain lions, the typical approach is they employ hound handlers, and they chase mountain lions up trees. They shoot them with a dart. The dart has a hollow tip. It just hits in, falls out, takes a tissue sample. And again, you run that through a lab. You get the individual IDs. You then do a second capture where you run a bunch of cats up trees again, shoot them all with a dart, and see again if there is or what proportion of those cats match your first capture. There are ways of doing this without catching the animal, without harassing them, without chasing them up a tree. And so a lot of folks are now looking at what we call non-invasive methods. So an invasive method is one in which you handle, you harass, you stress an animal in some way. A non-invasive is supposed to be hands-off. You know, you do not influence the behavior of an animal in any way. And so the way we do it with mountain lions is with scat dogs or scat detecting dogs. These are dogs that are trained to find the poop of a particular animal species, in this case, mountain lions. And so here you can see on our far left, this is Stephanie Arroyo and her dog Tigre, who these are actually employees, both employees of Panthera. They're based in Costa Rica. They came down and helped us in Patagonia. And they look for what's in the middle, a poop. This is an actual cougar scat. And then that gets moved to the lab. And the lab is where we extract the genetic material so that we can do the individual ID and look for then our recapture to see if that individual is detected in the second capture. This is Cameron Messias, who we'll talk about in a second, but she's from the Lower Oaklalam tribe, and she's actually extracting cougar DNA as in the photo at the University of Idaho. So just really briefly, I'm going to run through the pros and cons of some of these methods, and then we're going to start talking about what we're doing in the Olympics and beyond. So collars, there's a lot of great things that collars offer that are unrelated to counting mountain lions. But in terms of counting mountain lions, collars are super expensive. They're really time consuming. And generally the way people employ them, they only come up with an estimate of the number of resident animals in a study system. Biopsy darts, again, really time consuming, really reliant upon snow, because you're also reliant upon the services of hound handlers who require snow to reliably find cats and can run them up trees so that you can shoot them with darts. It's invasive, so it's not ideal. And in my opinion, if you're going to be invasive, if you're going to put a cat in a tree and shoot it, you might as well gather as much data as you can rather than just a tissue sample. In general, that method counts transients and residents. And you could certainly sample family members as well. But in the lab, all of those tissue samples, you couldn't differentiate between transients and residents just based on a tissue sample. So you don't know which are which. So your abundance estimate would include both. Scat dogs, remarkably expensive to hire trained hounds to find poop. There's some variation in performance across habitats due to weather, moisture, like how recently it rains or how much it rains. For instance, in the temperate rainforest like we have in Washington, it can't differentiate, of course, between age classes, let alone residents and transients. So you could have a kitten poop is a genetic sample just like an adult is. And so the abundance estimate from scat dogs for the number of mountain lions in a system most likely is higher than other methods because it includes kittens as well. Track surveys, people have tried doing, using individual footprints of mountain lions to see if they can tell individuals apart. It's proven unreliable, and most systems just don't provide the substrate or the perfect tracking conditions to get good sampling to make that work. And then last, cameras. The problem with cameras so far is the typical trail camera, you just can't tell individual mountain lions from each other. And I can admit that very clearly, as I was part of a team in which we tried in Wyoming. And we were so bad at it, it was almost comical. You know, every one of us came up with a different estimate for the number of mountain lions in the system based on these photographs. And there was a number of us all trying to do this on the team that we just, by the end of it, said, clearly we can't do this. We're not able to differentiate individuals reliably from trail photographs. That brings us to what we're trying now. So I'm going to talk to you about two projects at different ends of the earth. And in each of them, we're employing two different methods to estimate mountain lion abundance. The first study system is in Patagonia. If you don't know where Patagonia is, it's at the southern sort of triangle of South America. It's about 1 million square kilometers. It is renowned for sheep, wind, and ice, and penguins. Where we worked specifically was in Chile, in southernmost Chile. Magallanes is the name of the region, and in and adjacent Torres del Paine National Park. This is what it looks like. We worked on the eastern side of the park, which is dry steppe. It is wide open. There are few trees. There are hardly any roads. There are very few trails. And animals just wander about. And you can encounter them just about anywhere. I don't know if you see this, but right down here, that is a puma or a mountain lion. Our second study system is here on the Olympic Peninsula. And this project is, we call it the Olympic Cougar Project. It is a huge project in terms of scale and in terms of collaborations. The work, the Olympic Cougar Project, is run by two organizations, the Lower Elwha Clallam Tribe. I'm just going to use my arrow again. This woman at the far left is Kim Sager-Fradkin. Kim and I represent Panthera, co-lead the entire project. We run everything together. But we do that in collaboration with a huge number of people. We now have 6 First Nations included in the project formally: the Quinault Indian Nation, the Skokomish, the Makah, the Jamestown Sklallam, the Port Gamble Sklallam, and the Lower Elwha Clallam tribes. This group of folks at the bottom is the team that I work with the most. This represents our Panthera staff and the team from the Lower Clallam tribe. And so just to point out a few folks, we got Kim, we got Cameron, who is currently a PhD student at the University of Idaho. She's also a tribal member with the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe. We have Vanessa Castle, tribal member from the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, Sarah, Dave, Mike, Andy, and Reed, all of us contributing to the daily work that is required to keep the project afloat. We really have 2 big things we're trying to do with the Olympic Cougar Project. The first is we're assessing wildlife connectivity across the I-5 corridor, which runs, from Seattle to Tacoma and south to Portland. And we're trying to see whether the peninsula is still functioning as connected to the rest of Washington or has really become an island. And I'm not going to talk about that at all. The second is capacity building for local communities. And that's really where our cameras and counting of cougars comes into play. This is what the Olympic Peninsula looks like. If you've never visited before, it is dense. The trees are huge. It is green. And I mean, in places where there's timber harvest and things are regrowing, you can't see the length of your arm in front of your face. It is the polar opposite of Patagonia. And so we're trying these different methods in 2 radically different systems, and with the hopes that we're going to learn more about these methods and be able to directly compare the results. So the primary method that we are using is called space to event modeling. This is not something I came up with. the three folks who are really responsible for its creation are Anna Moyler, Paul Lucas in the middle, and Josh Nowak at the bottom. They're the three brains that came up with the idea of space to event modeling. And the two things I would emphasize about it. Number one, this is based on camera data. And what these folks figured out how to do is to use an analysis that benefits from the timestamp a photo has associated with it. Nobody was utilizing the timestamp before. So they were just saying, yeah, we picked up a mountain lion at this camera. But isn't it important that it was at 8:02 a.m. on October 21st? That little bit of information is really important. And they were able to pull that into analysis. And the second is the way this analysis runs, it does not require individual ID. It doesn't matter which mountain lion you get a photo of. All that matters is that you got a photo of a mountain lion. So suddenly cameras were open to us to estimate the abundance of mountain lions, which they never were before because we needed to identify the individual mountain lions based on previous capture, mark, recapture methods. So this was a game changer. And as of yet, no one has done a robust test to see if what I call STE or space to event modeling works to estimate mountain lion abundance accurately. And that's what we're about. We're trying this in both Patagonia and here on the Olympic Peninsula. Just on this slide, basically what I wanted to do is just kind of tell you how space to event works. In its boiled down sense, there's some really amazing math that those three brilliant people came up with to drive the models. But really when I describe it to folks, this is how I would envision it. This is the Pisht GMU. So this is just west of Port Angeles. This is where we began our initial estimate of mountain lion abundance on the Olympic Peninsula. This was from 2019. We put out a grid of cameras and think of each camera visibly seeing a little triangle of the world. So it sees some part of the forest where it's aimed. And think of each camera in that entire grid taking a photograph, so sampling space at the exact same time every 5 minutes. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, all of the cameras simultaneously go flash and take a picture of what's in front of them. 8:05, flash. 8:10, flash. Over and over for days, weeks, months, constantly sampling these same areas. And in its simplest form, the way to think about it is that if you only have one mountain lion living in this entire area, it can only be photographed by one camera at a time. It physically cannot be in two locations at the same time. So the more mountain lions that live there, the more potential there is to document simultaneously multiple mountain lions at different camera stations. And so based on the idea that it will take a mountain lion moving randomly on the landscape a certain amount of time to be detected at all, and the idea that they can only be detected at a single camera station at a time, that's what fuels the mathematics to come up with an estimate for the number of mountain lions in the area. The second method that we're using in both study sites is the non-invasive genetic capture recapture with scat dogs. So this is Cameron on the left. She is analyzing our data from the Olympic Project. In the Olympic Project, we work with, they were previously called conservation canines and now are road detection teams. And they're the team that they've come out the last 3 years and sampled gathering poop for all of us that we then give to Cameron to extract the DNA and do that genetic capture recapture. And we want those two different estimates from a single site so that we can compare them and see whether we get the same thing. I just wanted to kind of illustrate what it really looks like on the ground. This is our camera grid from Patagonia. So those are where the cameras are, the little red dots. We go out in the field, we literally hammer in a stake because there's so few trees. Down there, the wind is so vicious that I would build these little rock fortresses to hold up my camera, make sure they weren't shaking too badly. and then you leave it there and you get photos. Sometimes they're pumas, sometimes they're other animals. And then you take your animals that you're actually trying to estimate the abundance of, say your pumas, and we run them through the STE, and boom, it spits out density estimates for your species. And so I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you what we learned. So in 2019, we only sampled the pished GMU in Washington, and we came up with an estimate of 1.6 cats per 100 square kilometers, which translates to roughly 10 cats that live in the pished. That matched really well with our collar data. So it seemed to really build faith in the system and that it was working. In Patagonia, we came up in the same year with 6.1 cats per 100 square kilometers, meaning that there were about 4 times as many mountain lions in the system in Patagonia as there were in our system in Washington. And that really wasn't surprising because there are a lot of cats down there and people fly there specifically to see them. Now, I would just emphasize again that this estimate includes resident animals, so resident males, resident females, and transients. So those ones who are just passing through and may not stay for long. You can also do other things with this. Like for instance, here I just threw a heat map, which sort of tells you how often mountain lions were detected at each camera grid. And you can see that mountain lions were detected at a lot of cameras, but that there were 2 really big areas where there was sort of lots of detections of mountain lions. And in fact, you know, this is not based on any analysis, but I just quickly was like, wow, this spot, the one on top, is the heart of where Puma tourism is occurring. This is the exact place where people are flying in, driving in to photograph mountain lions in the wild. And you know, it's an actual business. It is happening year round now. People are walking with wild mountain lions. And that's exactly where they're doing it, which ironically is where all the mountain lions are on the landscape. So it makes a lot of sense. The second spot used to be quite a hotbed for tourism, but is now closed to the public. It happens to be the one place where a mountain lion has killed a human being in southern Chile and Patagonia in recorded history. And so it is interesting to see that that also is a hotbed for cougar activity or mountain lion activity. They're called pumas. So does it work? Does the space to event, the STE model work? This is where I'm going to stumble, because I was hoping that by the time this presentation occurred, I would also have our genetic recapture analysis complete, and I'd be able to compare them for you to build greater faith in the STE. And unfortunately, I literally this past week got the remainder of our genetic data for Patagonia. So I'll be doing that in the next few weeks. So we're just a few weeks too early. And Cameron is working hard and I think she's also in the next few weeks going to produce the first estimate based on recapture for Washington for 2019. And so unfortunately at this point, I can't tell you whether those 2 estimates match well or whether they don't. What I can tell you is that we have compared the abundance of guanacos, which are a llama-like animal that live down in Torres del Paine, with another method, and that matched. And that based on our collar data, where we overlap home ranges, et cetera, in the pished, the 2019 estimates based from the STE look really good. So we are building faith in the system, but you're going to have to wait to find out whether those 2 estimates match well enough to build faith moving forward. We are assuming that it is working. And here on the peninsula, we're going all in. And I hope that we're not making a mistake, but I feel good about it. We will have our first results on our recapture very soon. So it could, of course, influence our future direction. But just to show you what we've done. So in 2019, this little rectangle right here in blue, this was our camera grid in 2019. In 2020, we added this yellow rectangle. So we did both the blue and the yellow, and we pulled in the Port Gamble slalom and the Jamestown slalom, the Point No Point treaty biologists to collaborate with us to expand our camera grid across the north end of the peninsula. And then this year, we have pulled in with our collaborators in the Makah, the Quinault, and the Skokomish. We're going to be adding 3 additional areas. So this summer, we plan to sample the blue, the yellow, and these orange rectangles for a total of 350-ish cameras, representing about 4,000 square kilometers, where we'll be estimating not just mountain lions, but the abundance of other species as well. So that's super exciting. And we're hoping, again, that the results are good. I'm just going to end this way. Does it really matter how many mountain lions exist in an area? On the one hand, absolutely. We know that because we don't know how many mountain lions are, people can debate how many there are. And people can say there are too many, and there are those who can say there are too few. And it's this constant fight over whether we need to control them or protect them. And it's vicious, and it's dominated by the extremists on both sides. Most folks are more in the middle, but the voices that you continuously encounter on online, social media, etc., are those with extreme views. And so without knowing how many cats are out there, this will continue to occur. And my hope is that the SDE model, because it's cheap and easy to deploy cameras, do the analysis, could be a great solution. But I think the real power of the SDE model to me is that because it's cheap and easy to do, it allows us to monitor mountain lions over time, from 2020 to 2025 to 2030 to 2035. Because ultimately, I'm more interested personally in not how many mountain lions there are, but whether there is a change in the number of mountain lions on the landscape, because that allows us insights into whether we want to change what we're doing in terms of management or conservation of the species. There's a few things we know. We know that mountain lions are leading ecological actors in the ecosystems in which they live. We know that they have an incredibly diverse number of relationships with other animals, with invertebrates, with plants. We also know that there is some evidence that mountain lions are keystone species, or at least playing some keystone roles in supporting biodiversity and helping to build ecological health. We also know with great certainty that human health is reliant upon ecological health. And so therefore, for me, I'm not interested in how many mountain lions there are in a given place, but are there enough mountain lions in a given place to facilitate the ecological health, which in turn leads to human health as well? And I'll tell you right now, absolutely bluntly, we have no idea the answer to that question. We don't know if there's some threshold of mountain lions that we need to maintain certain ecological functions that they provide to ecosystems. We have no idea because we aren't trying to answer that question. And so I would encourage us to kind of begin to move that direction moving forward. Because ultimately, to me, it's this simple. We need healthy ecosystems. We know that the presence of mountain lions increases the health of ecosystems. And ultimately, we want healthy human communities with healthy children, and our lives are interlaced and integrated with those ecosystems because humans are not separate from environments, they're part of it. And that we know when we have healthy ecological systems, we also have healthy people. I've mentioned a lot of partners along the way, but I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned some others that were overlooked on the presentation so far. So just moving from one side to the other, this gentleman here is Dr. Hugh Robinson. He's a colleague at Panthera. He's also with the University of Montana. He's been instrumental in helping us refine STE models and sort of testing assumptions, etc. And has been a wonderful partner on the project. Rogue Detection Teams is the professional scat detecting dog handlers that has been working with us in Washington. Just below them, Working Dogs for Conservation. They trained Stephanie, the Panthera staff that now is a scat detecting dog handler, and provided and trained Tigre, who is the dog that now works for Panthera. Working Dogs for Conservation also sent some of their own staff down to Patagonia when we did our sampling there to help facilitate work there. The analysis of the scats collected in Idaho, in Washington, have been shipped to Idaho, where Cameron is a PhD student. So she works within Dr. Lysette Waite's lab at the University of Idaho. And the scats from Patagonia go to a different lab in Missoula, Montana at the National Geographic Center for Wildlife and Fish Conservation. So all of these folks are involved in these two projects, and without them, nothing would occur. So thanks to them. And that's really all I had to say. So thanks for listening. And I would just end this way, that if counting cougars interests you, if the ecological benefits of mountain lions interests you, if the controversies around mountain lions interest you, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. It came out last summer. It's called The Cougar Conundrum: Sharing the World with a Successful Predator. And I believe in the next few weeks, there's also going to be an audio version for those people who are like me, who only can read when cooking or driving or doing something else these days. But keep in touch, and thanks so much for listening, and we'll go to questions.